What's up, everyone? Today we're here with Stanley Onuegbu, who's just finished up his D1 year at UCSF School of Dentistry. We're going to learn a little bit about his journey to dental school and his experience as a first year during COVID. Stanley, thanks for being here today.
Absolutely, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're honored to have people like you a part of our community. So if you could just give us a brief description about, your undergraduate journey, like where you're originally from, where you went to undergrad, and just what got you interested in dentistry in the first place.
Yeah, so I grew up in a suburb outside of Seattle called Issaquah. And I actually did my undergrad not in Washington at all, but down in Texas at Texas Christian University. And kind of long story short, I kind of went there on a whim. My best friend's dad had told me about the school, but after I got in, they were very nice to offer me a pretty nice scholarship. And so I said, yeah, I can be a Texan for 4 years. But it was such a great school. And yeah, that's where I first kind of discovered dentistry. So I kind of went in just generally pre-health, knew I wanted to be in healthcare, just from just like pop culture and like seeing doctors on TV and all of that, but had no really idea where in particular. But it was really my experiences shadowing at a dental clinic, the Allen Sachs Dental Clinic in Arlington, Texas. That was like the first experience for me where I saw just the impact of dentistry and also how blind I was to it growing up. So in my suburb of Seattle, everyone kind of just went to the dentist twice a year, or at least that's what it seemed like. And me personally never really had any dental issues growing up. And so to go to these dental clinics and see patients sometimes taking multiple connecting buses and traveling all day to get to our clinic and waiting in line and have mouths full of work that needed to get done, it was pretty humbling. And then also, so you see huge need, but then also to see these dentists be able to fix a lot of that work, oftentimes in a matter of hours, or just a couple of visits. Again, it just to see the skill and to see how much impact they could have in patients' lives was that's really what sold me. And dentistry being such a personal profession, like you're right there in somebody's mouth. I saw a lot of opportunities for just being a fixture in a community and being able to grow with your patients while you're helping them.
That's very cool. And that seems to, be parallel with like what UCSF stands for with like promoting like better oral health, in the public and just, helping people in need. So like that's a really cool story.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're at UCSF, like I'm sure you had a strong DAT, right? So what was your method for tackling the exam, and like what would be your number one tip for Predents?
Yeah, man, the DAT, those are good times studying for that test. I honestly, and might sound weird to say, but I really, looking back on it at least, loved my experience studying for and taking the DAT, mostly because I think standardized tests in general are just such a good way to learn about yourself and to learn about what you're really about. And so for me, I followed pretty strictly the RE's 10-week plan from DAT bootcamp, and kind of just supplemented it at the end with some additional questions from Destroyer, and for like organic chemistry and math and all of that. So all that went well. And, I scored actually much higher than on any of my DAT bootcamp tests. So I was really happy with that. So I think the plan certainly works. And I would say also just a quick plug for on the DAT bootcamp like Facebook page. I actually made a post after I took my test. So if anybody's interested, they can just search my name on there. It should still be up. But in terms of tips, at the risk of sounding too cliched or trite, I really think it's less about the technical nuts and bolts of how you're studying. Of course, that matters, and there's plenty of great resources to point you in the right direction. But for me, what matters is the showing up every day and the staying consistent. And I think that when you're studying for standardized tests and you're taking practice tests and you're getting graded each time, it's really easy to get discouraged when you don't see a result that you're happy with. But I think that for me, one thing I really just had to learn was that, my identity is not in that performance ultimately. And no matter how much studying I was going to do. At the end of the day, I was going to take that test, and it could either be super hard and I could do worse than I thought, or I could, crush it. And I don't really have control over that. I just have control over the preparation. And, when I understood that, I was much more excited to show up every day and to study. And I think I got more out of it. And then I could show up on test day and really not feel super pressured, because I knew that I had done what I needed to do. And then it was just about performing. So I think that's my biggest tip for anybody who's studying.
That's very well said. It's like that 10,000 hour rule from Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just about like showing up and just doing the work. I feel like if you put the time in, you'll be rewarded in the end, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like I'm saying, like it's really hard to show up though if you are just so crushed by a poor practiced score, and there were days where, I felt dejected because I didn't get the score that I wanted. And I think the quicker that you can get over that, the more able you are to show up the next day after, studying doesn't go the way you want it to, or a practice test doesn't go the way you want it to.
All right, here's a bonus question. So I'm taking my DAT on Monday, so in 2 days.
Oh, wow.
What did you do the day before your DAT? Did you study a little bit? Did you review, or did you take the entire day off?
If I remember correctly, I think I went through some flashcards, to be honest with you. I don't think it was a full study day, because, really at that point, and if you look at the, RE's 10-week plan, the last week is real light. Like there's not a lot going on. You take maybe a practice test and it's mostly just built around rest. And so mostly for me, it was just biology and looking at that subject, because the other ones are kind of conceptual. So I wasn't too worried about that, but the biology, you don't really know what facts you're going to get on the test. So just seeing as much as I could, I thought would be helpful. And then clicking through PAT, because I was very worried about PAT going in. And I would say to anybody using boot camp, the PAT on boot camp was so much harder than what I saw on the test, which is a good thing, but I was pretty concerned about it until after I saw the score.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like people miss that uncertainty that comes with like studying for the DAT. Like when you're in the moment, like for me, like I hate studying for it right now, but I feel like in a week I would be like, God, I missed that. There was such a rush with studying for it. But
yeah,
yeah,
good luck, man. Like I really, I'm sure you'll do well, but that's a huge step. So congratulations.
Thank you. So can you talk to us a little bit about your, interview day at UCSF? I'm pretty sure it was still in person at the time, right?
Yeah. So I was the year right before COVID. So we were in person, and I think my interview was somewhere during the fall. But I flew in and stayed with one of my friends who lives out here in the Bay. So that was super nice. And then actually just took the Muni, so our local transportation, to get to school on the interview day. And, it was pretty straightforward. I had done a couple interviews at that point already. So the nerves of how the day runs those weren't there as much, but we basically started off, they introduced everybody and kind of walked us through what our itinerary was going to be. The first thing we did was we wrote around a prompt that they gave us, just kind of a free response. I believe it was a quote, pretty, just kind of ambiguous, vague quote, and you kind of just write. And so we did that. And then they gave us a presentation about all the nuts and bolts about the school and all the statistics and all of that. And then afterwards, we got into the interviews. So the way UCSF does it, you have 2 interviews. Depending on the order, you have one with a current student, and then you have one with a professor. And so we did those, and then kind of came back, probably, I believe, had lunch after that. But after that, it's pretty much smooth sailing. You're kind of just, I think we went over financial aid lastly, but it's a full day, but it's a fun day, honestly.
So when you came out of it, did you feel like really good? Like, I mean, I don't know how dental students usually feel after their interview. Like, were you like, yeah, I'm probably going to get in. Like, I feel good about it. Or like, what was going through your mind?
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer in that. It helps to have confidence going in. And so I was pretty confident, and just in my resume, and, I tried to speak with that confidence during the interview. And so I thought it went well. I think what was so interesting about UCSF, because the majority of schools I interviewed at, there was not the student interview component. There were a couple where there were, but student interviews actually for me are more nerve-wracking than interviews with faculty, because and it's kind of hard for me to explain why, but I think what I would say is, on the other side now looking at it, I don't know why I was so worried, because especially from, like, for me interviewing future students, all you're really trying to see is if they'd be a good fit, and, if they can hold a conversation, and if they have values that are concurrent with the institution. And so there's really not a ton of pressure. Just be yourself, the classic phrase, but it's so true. But for whatever reason, I was a little bit concerned about that. But, now I go to school here, and the girl who interviewed me, Becky, she's one of my friends, so we're all good.
Awesome. So, and usually, like, I mean, you hear when you go to these predental days, like, admissions committees say, "Oh, we love it when potential dental students, like, they ask us questions about the school." What were some questions that you would ask during your interviews?
Yeah. So I try to mix it up between, standard questions that if you prepare for an interview that are going to come up, like when people get into clinic, what sort of campus organizations there are, all those sort of what I would say is more general run-of-the-mill questions. But then for me, what I found as I went through the interview process was the speech that they give you, kind of overviewing the school, was super helpful in me determining questions. So I actually stopped about halfway through my interview cycle. I stopped really going in with prepared questions, and I would just spend the first few minutes just listening to what they had to say and kind of develop questions from that. And so I think some combination of that is probably helpful. Of course, you're going to have things that are really important to you as an individual. So ask those things. But for me, I just wanted to get as accurate of a picture of the school as I could and what my experience would be like. And so to ask questions based off of their own presentation, to me, I thought was really helpful.
I like that perspective. I might hold on to that. Okay, so did you show interest in UCSF, before you applied there? Because I know they have a lot of pre-dental events, and I just want to know, like, do you think they look at that and they see that, oh, you attended, you've clearly shown that you're interested in the school, or do you not think it makes a difference?
Yeah, so I can pretty confidently say that the admissions committee wouldn't be partial to anybody who does do those things or versus people who don't, because a lot of it's just about opportunity and honestly proximity. So in my instance, going to school in Texas, I really, this was pre-COVID, and so not a lot was going on Zoom. I had very few opportunities to interact with the UCSF School of Dentistry. And so I didn't do actually any of that. I had done some impressions conferences through SNDA at the Texas A&M School of Dentistry near TCU, but I really had no connection to the school prior. But I think that shouldn't dissuade anybody from doing those things. I think those things are great in terms of getting a good perspective about the school, and also getting the students' perspective is they'll let you know the truth of it. At least all the students here that I've met, they're open about their opinions, and I think everyone has their unique experience, and it's just good to get as many different experiences as you can.
Right. So another question for you is, why did you pick UCSF in the end? Because I'm sure you had, other acceptances, and just what stood out about UCSF, and what do you think made it so unique?
Yeah, and dude, that was the most difficult part, is the choosing, right? If you're fortunate enough to get a couple acceptances, and you just realize that I enjoyed most every one of my interviews. And so it was really hard to parse out differences between them, because by and large, you're going to get a good dental education anywhere. Like, we have accreditation standards. And so I really trusted that. And so it's hard to know if you're making the right decision. But I think for me, the biggest thing I learned going through the interview cycle, so full disclosure, I interviewed at 8 schools total. And over the course of interviewing at those schools, I didn't necessarily find out that there were better schools or worse schools. I just found out there were different schools. So you have some schools which are really specialty driven. Most of their students who go through it, they don't spend a ton of time in clinic in their pre-doc program. And most of them go on to specialty programs, whether it be oral surgery or any of the other specialties. And then you have some state institutions, perhaps, or just other institutions where people, the majority of the class goes straight into general practice, and they have a really beefed up clinical experience. And so just to see that difference was really eye-opening to me. And so in choosing UCSF, ultimately, I saw a school where it was kind of a hybrid between the two. You know, UCSF's name, I believe at least carries some weight. And so we do have a good rate of people who specialize, and the ability to do that is open, but we also have plenty of people who go into just general practice afterwards. And so the decision for me really came down to keeping options open and optionality, because, you know, again, it's a cliched phrase, but you ask any dental student or pre-dental student if they want to specialize, and the answer is always, oh, I don't know, but I want to keep my options open. And I think there's truth to that. Like, how are you supposed to know until you start school and you get exposure? And so for me, it was just about keeping all of those doors open and putting myself in a position where I could explore whatever I wanted to.
Very well said. So now, I mean, you finally went through your first year in dental school. What was the transition like, finally, like being a dental student, you know, after being a pre-dent for at least 4 years?
Yeah. And I think I might have forgot to mention this, but I did take a gap year. So I took a gap year after I finished up at TCU, and was actually a store manager at Target back home in Seattle for a year. And so yeah, it was hard to go from pre-dent to dental student, but then also to leave the workforce and now be a student again was really interesting. But you know, I think it was eased mostly by the fact that I actually ended up living with some dental students. And so I think that was really helpful in just getting me acclimated and making me feel at home at UCSF. And then also, you know, I want to discount your class's own desire to hang out with each other. You know, people were really open, and if people remember their freshman years of college, everyone's really open to make new friends because everyone's kind of going there with nothing. And so I didn't really feel like COVID hampered it all that much at all. People are resilient, and you know, whether it was hopping on Zooms with classmates or meeting up in small numbers when the local restrictions mandated that, we were still able to do things. It just looks a little different than I'm sure it did in previous years.
That's great. And can you tell us a little bit about your, you know, average day in school? I mean, is there a lot of like variation, or is it kind of like the same thing every day?
Yeah, so it's it was really nice is that they sync a calendar with they sync your Outlook calendar for you with where you need to be at every time, because it is kind of confusing. UCSF, we have several different I guess disciplines you would call them, or several different classes, and some of them meet 3 days a week, some of them meet only 1 day a week. And so for me, or I guess in general, it's really didactic heavy in the first year, as it is at most schools. And so it's a lot of lectures, but then for us first year, Wednesdays and Thursdays, we would have sim lab. So for us, it would be Crown and Bridge on one day and then operative on another day. And then on Fridays, we'd have clinic, and that kind of was a rotating schedule. So, you know, it kind of varied week to week. But what I would say is that, and this is where I think COVID did impact things a little bit, all of our didactics were virtual. So all of the sim lab and clinic, that was still in person, but the didactics being virtual kind of gave people the freedom to, if they wanted to watch lectures at different times, they could. So I think that was really the biggest difference. But besides that, from my understanding, it is pretty similar to years past.
And so did you feel like you were kept at like the same high standard as previous classes? And also, did you have restricted time in sim lab, or could you go in as much as you wanted, you know, to practice and get those, you know, hand skills, you know, up to like the normal standard?
Yeah. So I think in terms of the standard that they held us to, I'd like to think it was the same standard, and I hope it was. I still definitely thought first year was difficult. No matter how you slice it, it's a lot of volume for the didactics, and you're learning a lot of stuff. And so all of that was still there. We still received the same information. But what I'll say is that, and what I was really blown away with was just how flexible the faculty were in taking our concerns and kind of changing things when they needed to. An instance being, we had virtual anatomy lab instead of in-person anatomy lab for our first year. That was a decision the school made. And so we would do these virtual pro sections instead of obviously going in, which, is unfortunate. And in future years, I think they'll be back to the in-person dissections. But there were just some, there were some struggles early on. And so our class gave some feedback. And again, I was just blown away with the way that they took it in stride and really adapted it so that we learned best. And there were several times over the course of the year where our class would score the highest. They would always say we score the highest that they'd ever seen on the test. So I think that we got the same quality education. Now, in terms of SimLab, I think that's where I saw probably one of the biggest impacts. So it wasn't so much that we didn't have the time to be in SimLab, but there was just more structure around when we could go. So the way that we did it, we had open lab hours, but they were only between 9 and 5 p.m. There was a morning session and an afternoon session, and there had to be faculty supervision. That restriction has since been lifted, but what it looked like for me during the school year was, you talk to upperclassmen and they'd be like, oh, we used to go to SimLab at 1 a.m, 2 a.m, things like that. We couldn't do that. So you just had to be diligent about getting in when faculty were there so that you could get all your work done. But I think there was still ample time to get everything I needed to get done. And then the school provided us an at-home drill as well if we needed to practice more at home.
That's awesome. So, with restrictions, being lifted, slowly, but like still, still going, right? Has your school given any update on when you guys will maybe be back in person, or like what it's going to look like in the fall?
Yeah, so they've been a little bit, I want to say guarded about it, but they've been a little bit slow to communicate just because the situation, as everyone knows, is still kind of evolving a little bit. But there is a lot of optimism that we'll be back in person for didactics in the fall. But quite honestly, I'm not too concerned about it either way, because the important part of, in my opinion, at least the important part of dental school and learning dentistry is the hands-on part of it. And so as long as that's in person, I think that I learn all of the other stuff just as well from my desk at home as I would in a lecture hall. And so I'm not really too concerned if our lectures are going to be in person or online, so long as we continue the same model as we did last year, where we still have SimLab in person and we still get to go into the clinic in person.
Awesome. So my last question for you is going to go back for like the Predents out there.
Yeah.
What tips would you give to yourself, like when you were a Predent, like 4 years ago, 3 years ago? Like, what would you say to yourself?
Man, I think the biggest thing I would have said to myself is kind of similar to what I said about the DAT, is to, just try to stay the course. If you're planning on going into dentistry, honestly, if you made it into college and you're at college, I personally believe that you're surrounded by the resources to know what to do. And so it's just really a matter of if you can stay consistent and do them. And I think that doesn't get enough attention. Don't worry yourself so much about if what you're doing is the exact perfect thing. Generally that you need to volunteer, generally that you need to shadow and that you need to do well in school. And so making sure that you're just in a position to do those things to the best of your abilities, I think is really important, because, at least at my school, and I think it's the case at most schools, pre-health is really a program that weeds out a lot of students. And I think it's pretty unfortunate, because I saw a lot of people who would have been great doctors or dentists or vets that weren't ultimately able to get there. So of course you need to take care of the academics, but also I think just staying the course. would do you great dividends in the future.
Awesome. Stanley, thank you so much for your time and for your advice. I feel like this insight just goes a long way for both me and all the predents out there. If anyone has any additional questions for you, is it possible they can reach out to you like via email or Instagram?
Yeah, absolutely. So if they wanted to email me, they can email me at stanley.onuegbu@ucsf.edu. And then on Instagram, I'm underscore stan0. So stano, underscore stan0.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to include that information in the description of the video. So again, Stanley, thank you so much for your time. Everyone at home, if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when we upload new content, hit the notification bell. If you have any questions for us at FutureDDS, you can always DM us on Instagram at _FutureDDS, and we'll try to apply as soon as possible. And we'll see you all next time. Take care, all.
See ya.